Hey everyone who I can't see out there in the void. I'm Jessica Shurer. I am the clinical social worker and center coordinator at UNC Movement Disorder Center, North Carolina, which is a CurePSP center of care. I also have the honor of being on the board of directors for CurePSP. So as you can probably tell, I will be discussing some kind of loaded topics today, which is, we're going to do the best that we can in the 20 minutes that we have with these two loaded topics. But I just share that with the caveat that this is really the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the topics of discussing your diagnosis and navigating family dynamics as they relate to your diagnosis. I cannot advance my slides, which is always fun. There we go. All right. So first and foremost, why are we talking about this? Why is it important to talk about your diagnosis? There's so many reasons, but first of all, actually, this came up in my MSA support group pretty recently. We were talking about this very topic, and someone in my support group shared that while it's hard to talk about her diagnosis, she actually likes to do it in a way because it's given her a sense of ownership over that diagnosis. And every time she has shared about it, it's sort of solidified her ownership of it. And I really liked that term, the idea of owning it. A big thing with why it's helpful to talk about the diagnosis is that it really allows you to control the information that somebody has about that diagnosis. I've had a lot of patients and a lot of families share with me over the years that when they sort of take a little bit to share the diagnosis with somebody, that a lot of assumptions can come up and people kind of jump to their own conclusions about what's going on with someone, because a lot of times people can notice changes. So this is a way of helping to control that and really advocating for what's truly going on and what they want, what you want them to know about you. It can also be a really empowering act to tell people that this is something that I have. Like I said, this is something that you can own, and it's a way of advocating for yourself with it, but it's empowering that you're educating someone, that you, again, controlling that information, but that you have knowledge that they don't have about you and the journey that you're on. And so kind of letting them in on that journey. And we'll talk about this more, but it's really up to you how much you want to educate about them. It could be a matter of giving them all the information that you know about your diagnosis, or it could be a matter of here's something that we're experiencing and here's some resources to learn more about it, and kind of handing that over to them. And a big thing, and this came up in my support group recently too, it can be a really nice way to normalize it. And that doesn't mean that this experience would be considered normal, or it doesn't mean that it's something that you want, but it's a way to kind of ground yourself in that journey and say, this is what I'm going through right now, and I'm going to let you in on that with me. And then the big thing kind of ultimately with this is a way to gather support. It's really hard to ask for support. It's really hard to offer support if we don't really know what we're needing to support somebody with or through, or what you're needing support with or through. And so it's a way to, again, letting somebody in, but in what that means for you. If here's something I have going on, and here's how it would be helpful for you to support me. And I know this sort of sounds like if you're early on in the diagnosis of PSP, CBD, or MSA, but I think talking about the diagnosis, that's something that happens throughout the journey because you live with it for a number of years. And so it's not one point in time where you're talking about it and then you never talk about it again. It's something that kind of evolves as the experience of it evolves. So you all probably know, if you could think back to when you have shared about the diagnosis, whether it's early on or down the road, that people react very differently. And I think it's something worth reflecting on in order to help prepare yourself for other reactions as you continue to have these conversations. And I've sort of been gathering these different types of reactions that seem to be most common that people share with me. One is the expert. You all know this person. It's someone saying, oh, are you sure it's that diagnosis? Have they checked you for this other diagnosis? Have they done X, Y, and Z tests on you? Have they tried this medication that I was just reading about in the newspaper the other day? And so it's someone who sort of, it can be a little challenging because they want to help, but it's challenging in that it's sometimes you could be like, you know what, I have these other people who are experts in this right now, and that's not what I'm looking for, or I am the real expert in my experience. The fixer. Now, I think a lot of us have this tendency, I think it's human nature to want to fix people, to want to fix situations that are hard. But this can be really challenging when you're really just wanting someone to be with you and support you in a certain way, and they're just trying to make that problem go away. Sometimes people share that they have people react with too much positivity, but also not enough positivity. And too much positivity could be like, you know, you can beat this, and sort of that energy where you might just want someone to, that might not be where you're at in that moment. But the big thing that I hear is people don't want pity. Pity is more spectator-like than compassion. It maintains a safe emotional distance from someone in a challenging experience. And sometimes that's not always helpful, and you really just want a little bit more hope from somebody. I've had a lot of people share with me that one of the most challenging things is people shying away from them. A lot of times where some folks have their own challenges with dealing with difficult situations, with dealing with diagnoses, or these other difficult topics that are sort of not pleasant in our society, and you would hope that they would support you through that experience, but instead they don't know how to cope with that, and they kind of shut down, and they were once in your life and might not really be there as this part of it. And that can be a really challenging thing. This is a really well-meaning one, but people saying, let me know how I can help. And again, well-meaning, but sometimes it's really hard to know, like, oh, okay, here's exactly how you can help me. And so I think that's worth reflecting on, of how, and how you would like help from somebody, support from somebody, so you can actually respond to that. But also, that kind of goes with the fixer thing. Maybe you don't want help necessarily. Maybe you just, you being here, you being a listening ear, holding my hand, talking through this, that's what's helpful for me right now. And that kind of goes into too much support. Of sometimes there's all these people who come out of the woodwork, especially in the beginning of a diagnosis, and that can be really uplifting in so many ways. And I've also had people share that can be a little overwhelming. So knowing, again, how to advocate for what kind of help and support you're looking for. And then sometimes, and this sort of goes back to the shying away, not enough support. And that goes back to communicating with people around what kind of support you're looking for. And a lot of folks, when it comes to hard situations, just don't know what to say. And they feel bad sometimes that they don't know what to say. But it can also be helpful for you all to advocate for yourself. It's okay if you don't know what to say. So I invite you, with these kinds of tough conversations, talking about the diagnosis, checking in with yourself, to just be gentle with yourself throughout this journey. I think that's something that doesn't come naturally to a whole lot of us. I think we are our own worst critics. So when talking about the diagnosis, there's this idea that this implication that you need to first understand it before you can share it with other people. And sometimes, and oftentimes, you're learning about it as you're sharing it with other people, and that's okay. You're all on that learning journey together. I said that it can be really empowering to have it as a sort of normalizing it for yourself when you share it, but it's also a reminder of the reality of it. And while that's grounding and positive in some ways, it's also very hard. And I think one of the most common things that I hear from folks is the fear of burdening or worrying somebody. And I think that that's something that's worth reflecting on a little bit of what the idea of burden means for you. And if the tables were turned, would you feel burdened by somebody sharing something difficult or a diagnosis with you? We live in such an independent, focused society, which is really good in some aspects, but it also makes it that when people do need to let others in for help or ask for help, it can bring up a lot of guilt and fears of burden. And I think that sometimes we have this idea of this dichotomy of there's independence and there's dependence, and there's nothing in between. I had someone in a support group the other day share that for her, it's really about interdependence, that you can have both, and you can still be independent and be your own, own it for yourself, but also let other people in. It's okay if you get sick of talking about it. Sometimes people feel like their whole lives end up revolving around these diagnoses. And I've known some people who choose a day. Actually, I knew someone who chose a day a week where they weren't allowed to talk about their diagnosis. They weren't allowed to mention it. And it's not to pretend that it's not there, but it's just to give yourself some space from revolving around it all of the time. And sometimes you might wish people talked about it more. With hard things to talk about, sometimes people just pretend that it's not there, and you might want them to meet you where you are to actually talk about it. And just remind yourself, there is no right or wrong way to discuss your diagnosis. It just isn't. So give yourself permission to feel overwhelmed by it. That is okay. This is an intense and overwhelming experience. You're living with a diagnosis for the rest of your life, or your partner, your family member is, and it is a journey, and there's a lot to process in that. Also, give yourself permission to feel vulnerable. I think that, and sort of found that in our society, vulnerability is often viewed as a weakness, and so that combined with sort of ageism, and I won't get on my soapbox about ageism, but when people age, when people are faced with diagnoses, when people move and look and speak differently, think differently, we kind of internalize that as something's wrong with me, I'm weak. But I actually think that vulnerability, it doesn't have to be a negative experience. It's not comfortable, but it can be an opportunity to open yourself up, to take a risk. Those are things that take amazing courage. And it's okay to feel all of your feelings, whatever that means for you throughout this journey. And I'm sure that your emotions and your perspective on it changes as your symptoms change, as you settle into it, as you understand what it means for you, as you adapt. And even sometimes you might feel kind of opposite emotions, and holding those dualities is okay as well. And when people ask you about the diagnosis, it's okay for you to say that you don't have all the answers. And acceptance, that idea comes up a whole lot for people. With me, like my patients and families will share that they haven't accepted it, or they don't really know what acceptance means. And acceptance can mean different things for different people. It doesn't have to mean you like something, but it can mean that you're open to learning about it and to growing through it. So family dynamics are super complicated. Again, tip of the iceberg, and I'm also sort of running out of time. And I have a video I want to show you, so I'm going to try to go quickly through this, but there's so many factors in family dynamics. How people respond to the diagnosis, how people cope with things, communication patterns that they or you have had with them over all of these years, the relationship that you had before the diagnosis, and where people live. I know that that can be kind of a tough thing because, oh, my slides aren't advancing again. I know that that can sort of interact with how you're communicating with them and how frequently, especially in COVID times, and how we're connecting with people looks a lot different. So make sure that you're staying connected with people. Validate this experience for yourself and for other people, and carve in time where you can feel like equals, where you can reverse the caring role and reminding yourself and others that your life and your relationships are more than the diagnosis. So always check in with yourself and other people. I was going to show a quick video here, but I have a little bit of a fear that I don't have time. Can you all let me know if we should show the video or not?
We have about 2 minutes until there's 10 minutes for questions. How long is the video for?
It's about 2 minutes.
Okay, then go for it.
Okay. So you all were going to show that on your end, and thank you so much.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So why did I show that video? I showed it because when it comes to navigating family dynamics and having these kinds of conversations around your diagnosis or other challenging discussions, the biggest thing to remember, and this doesn't always come naturally for everyone, is having empathy. And a lot of times that does get confused with sympathy. And so I thought that Brene Brown, who actually voiced that video, she's a PhD social worker out of Houston, Texas, and she studies vulnerability and shame and empathy. I thought she did a really good job at defining that. But basically, when it comes to challenging situations, whether it's a strained relationship, having a difficult conversation, voicing a truth, taking a risk, a relationship to our changing abilities and bodies, what often helps support us is us the most is that someone connecting to the emotion rather than to the experience. Because I had a lot of patients and families share with me that someone will be like, oh, I know somebody that had this diagnosis, or I know exactly what you're going through because my mom had, name it, dementia, and they're trying to relate. But what usually people want is them to relate to just meet you where you are with the emotion. So I think that this is a good reminder in both directions, whether it's offering support to someone and just being there for and with them, but also in terms of advocating for yourself for the type of support that you need. So, just remind yourself, this sort of goes back to the compassion thing, self-compassion, but it takes courage, not only to be vulnerable, but to navigate uncharted waters. You are figuring all of this out somehow and probably surprising yourself along the way, and doing the best that you can with it. And so you can really be your strongest advocate, the strongest advocate for those other people who are supporting you, or your family members, your loved ones, your partners. And it takes courage to show up for yourself in this kind of experience. This is your story. You get to decide when you want to talk about it, who you want to talk about it with, who has earned the right to hear your story, what you want to tell people about, and how you choose to make meaning out of your disease journey. I actually just found out yesterday that the word courage comes from the French word for heart, and I don't speak French, so I'm going to butcher this, but it's cœur. And so just reminding yourself of that when you're having these conversations and figuring out what this story means for you, that this story comes from your heart. And I just want to end by reading this. It's another Brené Brown thing, but I just think that it speaks to so many people going through these disease journeys. It's called The Manifesto of the Brave and Brokenhearted. And it goes, there is no greater threat to the critics and cynics and fearmongers than those of us who are willing to fall because we have learned how to rise. With skinned knees and bruised hearts, we choose owning our stories of struggle over hiding, over hustling, over pretending. When we deny our stories, they define us. When we run from struggle, we are never free. So we turn toward truth and look it in the eye. We will not be characters in our own stories. Not villains, not victims, not even heroes. We are the authors of our lives. We write our own daring endings. We craft love from heartbreak, compassion from shame, grace from disappointment, courage from failure. Showing up is our power. Story is our way home. Truth is our song. And we are rising strong. The middle line is cut off, and I apologize, but you all can read that. It's cut off just because of how my screen is right now. But just reminding yourself that this is your story, and how you share it with people, how you connect with people along the way, who you let in on your story is part of that. And there's so much to gain and there's so much to learn. So with that, thank you so much. I know that I covered a lot and I had to do it kind of quickly, and it is loaded. And so thank you for going there with me. Did anybody have any questions?
Yeah, so we had a couple of questions pre-submitted, and as we're waiting for some live questions to come in, I'll start with these. One person would like to know how to discuss a new PSP diagnosis with her twin sister who lives by herself, and how to plan for advanced directives and future planning, etc.
That's a great question. I could do and have done a whole talk on just advanced directives. I put them in these slides but didn't mention them. Advanced directives can be a really helpful tool to have some of these conversations around planning ahead, around your beliefs in what life-sustaining measures means and dignity and end of life. So that is something I highly recommend everybody do, regardless of age, regardless of diagnosis. It can sort of be a guide for families to walk through those decisions and get on the same page. In terms of talking about it with the twin sister, I really appreciate that question. It's really hard to say because so much of it depends on the relationship with that person. Oftentimes twins are pretty close, and oftentimes when you have someone you're close to, it can be really hard to share with them something that is scary. But I find that more often than not, people who care about you, who love you, who want to support you, they want to be a part of that journey. I've had so many patients and families over the years not want to share the diagnosis with a sibling or a friend or an adult child because they're afraid of what that'll mean. And like I said, the burdening thing. And then somehow they find out, right? They find out at some point, and oftentimes they wish that they could have been there for them until, for all that time beforehand. So I say taking time to be intentional about sitting down with that person, saying, I have something I want to share with you, choosing what you want to share and how you want to share it. Making sure the TV is not on and the radio is not on. And it's just a really time where you can be there together and talk about it and say, I don't have all the answers, but I welcome your questions. Here's some resources that you can read. You can join a support group with me. There's other ways to learn more.
Thank you. That was great. Another question that came in is, my husband was diagnosed with PSP less than a year ago and now falls so frequently that he needs constant supervision. I am having a hard time trusting him to stay upright and feel he needs constant supervision. How do I regain trust that he can sometimes manage?
Oh, that's so hard. I think so much of these diseases is this constant battle of how do I keep somebody safe and how do I maintain someone's sense of dignity and independence. And it's just always navigating that. And ultimately, independence and how that is a part of your identity is always going to be important, but we do not want someone to have a major fall that lands them in the hospital or, with care that they did not plan for. And so I think it's worth, again, having these conversations with that person, with other people in your support system of how are other ways we can help support this person, make them feel like still a whole person and still an independent person, but bringing in some outside care, making sure that their doctor is looking at their medications to see if there's anything they can tweak to help with the falls. A lot of times people with PSP will eventually need a wheelchair, which is a hard transition, but we actually find that a lot of quality of lives go up after someone's in a wheelchair because they stop falling all the time and they don't have to worry about falling. Their loved ones don't have to worry about falling, and then they can really just be there with one another with that safety factor removed. So working with a physical therapist early on and continuously throughout the diagnosis to see when can we bring in this adaptive equipment that can make life a little bit easier for everybody. But again, maintaining communication and dialogue about that transition all along the way.
Thank you so much. That was incredible, and everyone was really enjoying your topic. We really appreciate you being here with us today.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Thanks, CurePSP, and thank you everybody watching today. I hope everyone keeps staying safe and enjoy the rest of your conference.